This is Brad Keithley, Managing Director of Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Welcome to the weekly top three, the top three things on our mind here at Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets for the week of June 29th, 2026. The weekly top three is a regular segment on the Michael Dukes Show. The show broadcasts on both Facebook Live and YouTube Live, as well as via streaming audio from the show's website, weekdays from 6 to 8 a.m. I join Michael weekly in the first hour of Tuesday's show from 6:10 to 7 a.m. for a discussion between the two of us about our three issues. We post the podcast of our discussion following the show on the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets Facebook, YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, and Substack pages, also on the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets website, as well as the project's page on national blog site, medium.com. You can find past episodes of the weekly top three also at the same locations. Keep in mind that in addition to these podcasts, during the week, you can follow and participate in the discussion with us of these and other issues affecting Alaska's fiscal and economic condition by following us on the Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets Facebook page and through our posts on Twitter. This week, our top three issues are these. First, we explain the state's fiscal trajectory, even if spending growth is held to inflation from FY26 forward. Second, we discuss why we continue to believe that the Alaska legislature should pass the S-corp amendment and override the governor's veto of the resulting bill if necessary. And third, we discuss the fact there are no Jay Hammonds in the race for governor and why that is troubling for Alaska. And now, let's join Michael.
Brad, we got a lot of things to talk about here, and let's get started with the weekly top three. We're going to start off with the fiscal trajectory. I almost read that as tragedy. The fiscal trajectory that the state is on. I mean, I'm not wrong, right? I mean, it's kind of where we're at, the fiscal tragedy that the state is on. Give us your thoughts on this. Let's get started.
Well, first of all, welcome or happy end of the fiscal year day.
Yeah,
this is
that's true. Just the last day.
The end of fiscal year 26. And you know, we were going to celebrate that with high oil prices, but now we're not. So it's a good time to sort of delve into what's going on with the fiscal issues. We did the show last week, and I started off every segment by saying we're $1.9 billion in debt. That's sort of the driving force to things that I think about. And I got some pushback on that. Oh, we can't be that big in debt. It can't be that bad. Revenues are going to come. You know, oil production's going to come save us. Don't worry about it. We're all going to be okay. So I thought, okay, so let's do the numbers. Let me show you how the numbers work and how we're deep into debt. So I've done a couple of charts, as I always do. I've done a couple of charts today that try to look at at where we are. This is the latest chart. This uses the most recent oil prices. So oil prices are down from the previous projections that I got $1.9 billion out of, and I'll explain where we are now. But this is the latest chart with the latest oil prices, the latest forecast from the Permanent Fund Corporation of what the permanent fund earnings are going to look like, and the POMV draw is going to look like. The latest spending numbers from FY26, the final FY26 numbers, including the supplementals, and then adjusting those going forward for only for inflation, not increasing them any more than inflation, but increasing them for inflation. And here's the results. The top half are the gross results. The bottom half are the focus in on the PFD. And the focus is, for those who are watching this online, the focus is the yellow line, which is the current law deficit, using the statutory PFD to set the revenues. That is the portion of the POMV draw that goes to government, goes for government services, is the portion set by statute, the amount remaining from the POMV draw after the PFD is taken out. And the numbers are, if you look at this, you see all red in that yellow line. And those are deficit numbers across the entire yellow line, only increasing current spending levels. The spending level approved by Governor Dunleavy when he signed the budget after the vetoes, only increasing the spending levels by inflation, year on year by inflation. And you can see they go from 1.66 billion in FY26, 1.83 billion in FY27, and they continue growing over the period until you get to FY35. And this is a year in which production is growing rapidly. And everybody says, oh, we're going to be saved by resource development, by growing production. When you get to FY35, the budget deficit is $2.24 billion, bigger than it is now. And the reason for that is two things. One, the rate of spending growth is outstripping the rate of revenue growth for sure. And the rate of revenue growth is actually, when you look at production taxes at least, are going down. So it's widening the gap between growing spending and decreasing revenues over the period. The average over that period at the currently projected production levels, currently projected the futures market for oil pricing, the currently projected spending levels increased by inflation, and the current projections by the Permanent Fund Corporation of POMV levels and PFD levels, the average deficit over the 10-year period is $2.09 billion over that entire period. And so it's not, I mean, there's not anything that's coming to save us. There's not anything riding over the hill. Increase in production, which is factored in here. We have a 40% increase in production over this period, and yet we end up at the end of the period with a higher deficit than we have at the beginning of the period, even with increased production. So some people say, okay, well, you're assuming inflation. Let's assume half inflation.
Okay,
we've done that. The next chart is half inflation, and when you look at that, no, that's still the first chart. There we go. When you assume half inflation, the deficit doesn't get to $2.09 billion. And by half inflation, I mean this: spending only grows at the rate of half of inflation. So essentially, you're having real reductions in real levels of spending, real in the economic terms, reductions in real levels of spending, because you're only keeping up with half the rate of inflation over the period. And when you look at those numbers, again, we start at 1.66 billion. Now, at the end of the period, we're only at 1.45 billion. We've caught up some by limiting growth to half inflation, if we could actually do that. But still, the average over the entire 10-year period is 1.71 billion. And still, at the end of the period, when we had this 40% growth in production, still at the end of the period, we are over $1 billion, nearly $1.5 billion in deficits. So when I start out every segment and say, look, the starting point here is we are running huge deficits. This is what I mean. I mean, if you look at it, inflation, we're running over $2 billion in average deficits over the next 10 years. When you look at it at half inflation, we're running at 1.7 billion. All right, some people say, okay, well, we'll just cut our way. We'll just cut our way out of this. We'll handle all this deficit spending by cutting it. I did the calculation. We have to cut spending on average over the 10 years, each year on average annually, by something like 25% in order to balance this out through spending cuts. And when you look back at 2019, what was the reduction there that Governor Dunleavy was proposing?
8%, 7-8%, something like that.
Yeah, wasn't even 10%, and he couldn't get 16. I mean, he needed 16 to be able to uphold the vetoes to get to the spending levels that he had proposed. He couldn't even get 16 to back him up on that level of cuts, and we're talking more than double that level of cuts every year going forward in order to balance this through spending cuts. So we need to be realistic about this. We are in a state that given the current law projections, by current law I mean the spending at the statutory levels, given current law projections, we are in a state, assuming inflation, spending grows in inflation, we're in a state where we are over $2 billion in the red on average over the year, and we are 2.45 or something,
right,
in debt, 2.24 in debt by the end of the period, even with 40% increase in production. So that's my starting point. When somebody says, "Oh, you're over dramatizing this,"
right.
or "Oh, you're, when you talk about taxes, you're just not taking into account that we've got, future production growth and we got future revenues out there, and you're getting overwrought about all this stuff." This is the starting point. These are real numbers.
Right. But I can already hear the people going, "Oh, but you're assuming a statutory PFD, and that's never going to happen anymore." I could see, they already see the argument. That's never going to happen anymore because that's just fiction. That's just fairy tales. But that's what the law says. Well, I mean, what do you say to them?
Well, the response is, okay, then we're going to have taxes. What you're saying is the way we're going to solve this is through personal taxes, through PFD cuts. Now, okay, since you're saying we're going to solve this through taxes, let's talk about what the best tax is. The PFD cuts, using PFD cuts as the tax approach, has the largest adverse impact on the overall Alaska economy. It is by far the most regressive. It is by far the most difficult, or the most takes the most from middle and lower income Alaska families. So let's talk about better tax approaches. If you're saying, okay, we're going to solve this through taxes by cutting the PFD, let's talk about tax approaches, and let's get the best tax approach as opposed to the most regressive tax ever proposed approach out there that takes the most from middle and lower income Alaska families. I'm ready to have that conversation. I'm ready to have a conversation about how we approach taxes. But that's the conversation you're triggering when you say we're going to do this through PFD cuts. That's the conversation you're triggering. You say we're going to solve this through personal taxes. Fine. Then let's talk about which type of personal tax is the best for the Alaska economy and the best for Alaska families.
Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, the weekly top three. That's number one. Final thoughts on number one, Brad. 1.9 billion is not a pipe dream. That's where we're at. It's $1.9 billion upside down, according to the statutory numbers, every year moving forward, and getting up to, as we pointed out in the first one, getting up to the 2.41 by 2031, $2.41 billion at statutory levels by 2031. Final thoughts on this?
2.24 billion, but what's $200 million between?
Right, friends? Sure. I'm on friend, right.
My point is this: everybody, every legislator, every person who wants to talk about the state's fiscal situation needs to start with that number in mind, and we need to stop this fiction of we're going to dig our way out of this through production increases. Or we're going to dig our way out of this through the gas line. And we're going to dig our way through. We're not. These numbers are too big. We've got ourselves into a situation. It's a combination of spending growth and a combination of revenue decline. But we've got ourselves into a situation that is hugely problematic going forward. And we should not be solving it. If we want to talk about taxes now, if you want to talk about PFD cuts, we should not be solving it in a way that has the largest adverse impact on the overall Alaska economy and has the largest adverse impact on middle and lower income Alaska. 80% of Alaska families, especially at the time that we have outmigration. We should be talking about better approaches to solve it.
Brad, here's my question, based on the number one of the weekly top three. Here's my question: does anybody really get it in the government? I mean, there's a few legislators who seem to understand this, but $1.9 billion in deficit moving forward, and everybody's ignoring those numbers. I mean, I've hit every candidate with those numbers, and they just seem to brush them off, and I didn't even go to 1.9. I was like over $1 billion in deficits every year moving forward and they just kind of brush it. Even Adam Crum, who was on the program as the commissioner of revenue, and they just kind of brush it off. What do you say to that?
It's denial in the extreme. I mean, these aren't fake numbers, and these numbers account for the dramatic increase in production levels that we've got going on at the end of the 10-year period. They aren't fake numbers, and I think I think they're just too staggering for people to deal with. Plus, when you deal with them, when you actually confront them and you actually talk about them and you actually think about them, you realize you need revenues, and I'm going to talk about this in the third segment a little bit, but none of these candidates are willing to talk about revenues. They're willing to talk about a little bit of revenues at the margin, or they're willing to talk about some PFD cuts, but they're not willing to talk about the type of revenues it takes to balance out the budget under current law. And they know that there will be pushback when people talk about taxes, just like I get pushback when I talk about taxes on the program, or when I write about them on the landmine column. I get a lot of pushback about that. But these are the numbers you're dealing with. And when you go to somebody and say, these are the numbers, show me different numbers. Well, they can't show me different numbers, because those are what the numbers are.
But what about the genius of the walrus? I know what I'm going to do. I know what's talking. I mean, he's been on the conference committee since Christ was a corporal. I mean, or the finance committee. Doesn't he know? I mean, how do we look at this and go, oh, this is fine? I mean, this is fine. The house is burning around me, but this is fine. I'm shaking my head, wondering how we got to this point and how do we get out of it. It's nearly impossible. Brad Keithley continues with us. We call it the weekly top three, the big three issues that Brad thinks is important for us to acknowledge and talk about. And avoidance apparently is a strategy. That is the key for what we're seeing here in the state of Alaska. Avoidance is a strategy. And now we're going to jump right over to number two, which is why he continues to think that the Alaska legislature should pass the S-corp amendment. He and I had a little bit of an argument about this last week, where I was saying this is a whole separate issue that I would like to look at it, but I don't know if it needs to be tied to the gas line. Brad still thinks it does. All right, Brad, hit me with it. This is your second go around on it. Give me your thoughts on why the S-corp tax amendment should be included in the gas line debate and everything else.
All right, so we've just gone through the baseline, right? We've just looked at the baseline numbers, the $1.92 billion in deficit, depending upon what the oil prices are on the day. We've looked at that, restraining spending going forward to half of inflation. That gets us all the way down to $1.7 billion. Not a huge improvement on where we're otherwise headed. We've looked at what it would take to close the gap through spending cuts, and it's more than double the level that Dunleavy tried in 2019, and we all remember the firestorm that sent off. And he's never tried it again. The legislature's never tried it again. So we know the ridiculousness of arguing, oh, we're going to solve this through spending cuts. We are going to have taxes. We are going to have some form of taxes. We're either going to tax royalties that are distributed to Alaskans in the form of PFDs. We're either going to tax those specially, which has the largest adverse impact on the overall Alaska economy, and has the largest adverse impact of all of the tax approaches, personal tax approaches, on middle and lower income Alaska families. We're either going to do that, or we're going to find better tax approaches. And the question is the S-corp fix one of the better tax approaches? To go back to a couple of things that we talked about last week, the S-corp fix is not novel. Texas, they do it in different ways than what we're proposing to do in Alaska, what some are proposing to do in Alaska. But Texas taxes S-corps through their business franchise tax. And in Louisiana, again, the two big LNG states that we've got right now, in Louisiana, they have a personal income tax, so that when the S-corp provision kicks in and drops the income down through the corporation, it's not taxed at the corporation level, it's taxed at the personal level in Louisiana. And outside owners outside Louisiana who have income coming through the S-corps take that income and pay tax on it through the Louisiana personal income tax. So the two big states that people want to say, oh, we're in competition with them, we need to be like them. Well, they are taxing S-corps, pass-through entities. So the question is, as we set up this gas pipeline, as we talk about the economics of the gas pipeline. As we talk about economics of gas, how are we going to, what should we be doing about it? And I think in that context, and in the context that we're facing a $1.9 billion deficit, in that context, we ought to be talking about the S-corp tax. Department of Revenue has done some really good economic stuff. One exception to that on the phase one economics, but Department of Revenue has done some really good economic analysis with respect to various pieces of the gas pipeline. And in the hearings last week before the conference committee about the S-corp provision, they did a chart that showed what the impact of the S-corp provisions would be. And it's a great chart. It shows it takes the revenue in three pieces. One is what would be the impact on existing oil producers of having the of closing the S-corp loophole, and that's in blue, and it's primarily directed at Hilcorp. Hilcorp would be the primary taxpayer who would now start paying in the same way that Hilcorp's production in Texas pays and Hilcorp's production in Louisiana pays. So that in blue is the Hilcorp tranche. The next tranche in orange is the incremental impact on producers, the incremental revenue they would get, the incremental tax they would pay on the incremental revenue they would get from initiating gas sales. And so this is the upstream producers. It's the upstream revenue that they're getting, the upstream profits they're making off of selling gas, and that is captured in the orange. And again, a lot of that is Hilcorp. It's a few others, but a lot of that is Hilcorp. And again, it's the same sort of structure that Hilcorp has in New Mexico, where they have a corporate income tax or a personal income tax in Texas, in Louisiana, in all of the places in which the primary production areas that we view as our sort of standard that we compare ourselves to. So that's in orange, and that tax would begin when the producers start realizing profits from sales into the LNG line, which is 2032. So up until that point, up until 2032, we see mostly blue, which is extending the tax to those who are currently using the S-corp loophole. The blue on oil. The orange starts kicking in 2032 when we start making first gas sales. And then the gray is the impact of the S-corp provision on Alaska, on AKLNG. And that doesn't kick in. I mean, it kicks in slightly in 2036 when they start making some profit off the line. And what's really driving this is depreciation. They're taking heavy depreciation against their tax obligation, their income tax obligation, for the first several years of the operation of the line. So the gray starts in 2036, but it starts very slightly, a very slight amount. It doesn't really start in significant effect until 2046, which is 15 years after the start of operation of the line. And then it increases from then on, because they pretty well depreciated out the line for tax purposes, and so the income for income tax purposes is growing. But that's only the tax share of the income. Their profits are growing dramatically during that period. Accounting profits are growing dramatically because they're off depreciation. Accounting profits are growing dramatically, and this reflects the tax share. So when people say, "Oh my God, this is just undo the property tax exemption that we've been fighting, that they've asked for, that we've been fighting about," no, it wouldn't. The property tax exemption, as they described it, was to avoid putting a front-loaded tax burden on the pipeline. It was to change it into essentially a volumetric tax that they would be taxed once they started moving gas and at the rate they started moving gas. This has a similar effect. It's not volumetric. It's calculated on profits, but it follows the same sort of trajectory of not front loading the tax burden on Alaska LNG. So I think this chart does a lot, frankly, to undercut those who say, "Oh, this is just horrible. It's going to undo the AKLNG line. They can't operate with this sort of tax burden layered on." It's not a significant tax burden for the first 15 years, and it only becomes a significant amount of revenue to the state when Glenfarne and when the AKLNG project is generating huge amounts of revenues, huge amounts of profits for the pipeline. So let's go back to the beginning. The beginning is we're facing a $1.9 billion, $2 billion deficit as far as you can see into the future. And we know, even given the current oil tax code, we know that even when you have substantial increases in production, you don't have substantial increases in state revenue because of the way that SB 21 is driven, and because a lot of that increased production is coming off federal lands, so we don't get a royalty share from there.
Right.
So we know we're facing this huge fiscal imbalance going forward. The question is, I'm not advocating tax for tax sake. The question is, how do you deal with that huge deficit we've got? And I think the S-corp tax is one way of dealing with it in a fair, not discriminatory, because again, they have the same sort of result tax effect in Texas and Louisiana, not discriminatory. We're still, dealing with them on a par. And I think it's one way of dealing with the huge financial situation we're facing.
So, I mean, I don't disagree with your analysis here. I don't disagree with it. I guess my question is this: could they pass a clean, quote unquote, gas line tax bill, and then come back and revisit the S-corp tax next session, and still capture all of this stuff moving forward? That's my question.
And the answer, the answer to that is no, in two respects. The first is no, because we're not having a huge amount of success in this state passing revenue measures on their own. We finally get these minimal revenue measures out of the legislature, the e-cigarette tax, the corporate the corporate internet tax, basically. States that are tax on people who do business in the state through the internet. We finally get those out of the legislature. Then they get vetoed because we don't have a comprehensive fiscal plan, even though we let spending keep growing. Then they get vetoed. So we're not having a huge amount of success with these standalone revenue measures, and I doubt very much we would have a huge amount of success with a standalone revenue measure on gas if we let the line go through, because people are then going to say, "Oh, well, we didn't have that tax when they built the line." It's sort of like Hillcorp. We didn't have that tax when they built the line. Don't do this after the fact. Don't impose this after the fact, after they've done the economics for the line and gone forward with the line. The second thing is that I think that it's important that the pipeline know the economics, know what we're going to do in this state before they while they're running the economics, while we have all of this before us. Bert Stedman made this point over the weekend. He said, we could tax you later, but then you're gonna say, "Oh, you're coming in after the facts to tax us after we made the investment," and all that sort of stuff. And then we'd have all this sort of argument. It's better to have all of this for you to know what your economics are up front, and to have that full debate up front rather than come back and try to grab revenue later on.
I want to just go to this real quick. Terry says, there's a chain here. Let me get to it. How about a gas line to keep the state from freezing to death? To me, that's a big benefit. I agree. Frank comes out again, as he's been wont to do over the last few days, and says, "I don't have gas and I haven't frozen yet." Frank keeps going on and on about how Fairbanks, we don't care about gas because we don't have gas and it doesn't benefit us. But I don't know how many times I got to tell you this, Frank. The reason why you are now paying a 61% fuel surcharge increase is because we don't have enough gas to ship that 30% of GVA's production up the intertie. You're going to be paying 27% on your overall bill more over at least the next 90 days, potentially the next 120 days, because they don't have enough gas to ship 30% of GVA's needs up the intertie. So while you may not have gas at a spigot at your house heating your home, if you have any kind of electricity, you're paying 27% more right now because we don't have enough gas to generate. This is this whole argument about, well, I'm not on the road, I'm not in Anchorage, I'm not in Wasilla, I'm not in the South Central, so I don't really care one way. You should care. Every dollar, every MCF of gas that we don't have means higher energy costs for everyone on the intertie, the rail system, the road system. All of those things are connected, Brad.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree, Michael. The state would hugely benefit from a gas line done the right way. And the right way is when we have the export volumes to lower the economies of scale of building the facilities down to lower costs, that then we should proceed with the gas line. We ought to be focusing on doing what it takes within reason to make that work and to get the benefits of the gas line. That benefits the entire state, not only South Central, where the gas shows up, but also Fairbanks, which gets a part of the gas. And also on the electric side, we lower the cost of the fuel that the electric companies are paying. When we are with the export volumes at full volumes going through that line. What we don't want to do is build this line just for phase one and then get stuck in phase one, because then the costs to both South Central and Fairbanks and everybody else who otherwise would benefit go up higher than they would from importing LNG.
Right.
So we've got to do this line the right way. We shouldn't just be running, we got to build the line. Wait until you have those export contracts in hand and you have the economics underlying achieving lower costs for Alaska in hand. Don't get yourself stuck out there in phase one and then end up being stuck in phase one for the next 50 years.
This raises an interesting question. We were talking about this yesterday, I think in the end of last week, which is, first of all, it's the chances of a gas line actually going through seem to be getting smaller and smaller, diminishing by the minute, it seems like, as we watch these committees work on it. That's just my feeling on it, that there's a lot of foot dragging. And my question is, where does the import scheme fall on this? Have we gone too far? Are we, is the import steam still waiting in the wings? Because that's our only other choice, right? That's our only other option. What do you think about that? 2 minutes here.
Well, we've got two proposals. We've got the Hillcorp proposal to repurpose the old Kenai LNG export plant to import gas. And then we've got the Glen Farm NSTAR proposal to build a grassroots LNG import facility. We've got proposals out there on how to do this. There's a third that uses the old Osprey platform as well. We've got proposals out there on how to do this. We need to be getting ready to do it. But at the same, we need to be getting ready to do that at the same time as we pursue, as Glen Farm pursues the export contracts to tie down the volumes that justify the construction of the gas line.
You looked a little skeptical when I said that I'm feeling like the window is closing on the gas line here. What do you think the over and under is? I got a minute. What do you think the over and under is here, that they actually get something in that actually moves forward and is actually usable for the phase two?
I want to see, there's a missing component here, which is what it will take to get the export volumes tied down. We've had virtually zero discussion about that issue. And that's the critical issue for making this gas line work, not only for Alaskans, but also for the producers and also for the economics for the state. We need to find out where that is. And I think it's doable. I think the gas line is doable in that competitive environment, but we need to get that rate resolved.
Brad Keithley, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets, the weekly top three. We're on to the third of the big three for today. And this is the question that a lot of people, I think, have been asking over the course of the last, not just this cycle, but many cycles. Why are there no Jay Hammond candidates? Not even in the Republican. When we're talking about the governor's race, why are there no Jay Hammond style candidates, Brad?
Yeah, Michael, I've been sitting. We've talked about this on the show some, and I've been sitting trying to figure out why I don't like any of the candidates in the gubernatorial race. That they all of them seem to be denying reality in terms of where the state's heading from a fiscal standpoint. All of them are denying reality in terms of what's the best approach for dealing with where the state's going from a fiscal standpoint. And I've sort of realized that what I'm looking for is a Jay Hammond, somebody who dealt with those factors, talked about taxes, was willing to talk about taxes at a personal level, was willing to talk about taxing oil companies to achieve the maximum benefit standard in the Constitution. Somebody who's willing to talk about the revenue side as well as the cost side, and we don't have any candidates anymore who talk about those things in the way Hammond did. There's another piece of that has really struck me the more I've thought about it. Hammond, at least in his writings and at least going back and trying to reconstruct what he said during his time in office and during the campaigns that he ran, Hammond sort of had a starting point of the individual Alaskan, and trying to identify and focus on what benefits the individual Alaskan. I think that's where the PFD came from. The PFD came from, look, let's get a share of the state's commonly owned wealth to the owners, to those who own the commonly owned wealth. Let's get a share of that in their hands and enable them as individuals to have the economic benefits just the same way that royalty owners have the economic benefits, mineral interest owners have the economic benefits in Texas and Louisiana and Arkansas, New Mexico and Colorado, West Virginia, all the producing states. Every other state has a system that gets money to the individual owners. Let's have a system in Alaska that gets that money, just like in those other states, gets that money in the hands of individuals, and let individuals, benefit from that and let them determine for themselves the economics out of that. Let that help them with their economics. And I think Hammond focused on, let's focus on the individual and what makes the individual better. What makes the individual Alaskan stronger? What makes it more economically self-sufficient? What gives it revenue to be able to do things in the state, to be able to live in the state and build things in the state, because it gives them some capital formation. All the candidates today, as I think about it, none of the candidates today start with the individual. Some of the candidates are going to disagree with that and say, "Oh, I start with the individual," but they really don't. In my view, what all the candidates today are doing is starting with the state and saying either A, how do I make the state bigger, stronger, a bigger force in the state, better prepared to dole out money to this group and that group and the other group, or they say, how do I make the state weaker by taking money away or redistributing money or doing things that reduce the power of the state. They would say in reducing the power of the state, they're increasing the strength of the individual, but none of them start with the individual and say, I'm going to make the individual stronger. I'm going to make the individual Alaskan better positioned to deal with his life in the same way that you have in Texas and Oklahoma and Louisiana and Arkansas and the other states where you have oil production. I'm going to make the common resource, one of the members of the common resource ownership in the state, stronger by sharing a piece of their commonly owned wealth with them. I'm going to start there. And then Hammond did. I'm going to start there. And then to fund the things the state needs to do, I'm going to talk about income taxes, and I'm going to talk about oil taxes to pay for the program. What Hammond did in doing that was enable the individual, energize the individual, and really talked about how do you pay for state government after you've first taken care of the individual. And when you talk about spreading the burden of funding state government through taxes, then he's frankly automatically engaging controlling costs, controlling state spending by creating this huge number of people who push back on spending increases because they know they're going to have to pay for it through taxes. And I think there was a genius in the way Hammond thought about this. I've always thought there was a genius in the way Hammond thought about it. You take the Alaska construct, where all of the minerals are given to the state in the beginning. How do you create the individual wealth in individuals in Alaska, residents in Alaska, that you have in the other states when you've had all the mineral state given to the state? And I think Hammond was a genius in creating the PFD and in finding a way to, in Alaska, do the same thing that's done in the other states. None of the candidates are doing that, in my opinion.
Part of the problem is that the whole thing's been suborned by the legislature, because that was Hammond's vision. I mean, it's in the intent language in the statute for the PFD. Alaskans have first call. I mean, that is in there, and it's just been suborned by the legislature to mean, well, we'll take the money and give you what's left over. I mean, that's part of the problem, and I don't know how to fix that or address that when you've got that mindset in the legislature. It's the Wielechowski mindset, the Giesel mindset, maximum revenue to the state. Matt claiming $1 billion isn't enough. We need more. I mean, how do you? It's not even in the DNA anymore, it seems like.
I think part of that is the lack of a governor who is expressing that. I mean, Hammond expressed that. Hammond expressed the goal of the individual sharing in the wealth, not the share determined by 21 and 11, 21 in the House, 11 in the Senate, and 1 in the governor's mansion. Not centralizing that wealth and then the 21, 11, and 1 deciding out who gets it. Getting that wealth in the hands of the individual from the get-go. We don't have a governor that's articulating that. And so it's frankly not surprising to me that we don't have legislators who are following that. I mean, because they're not going to get what Hammond did was sort of set the bounds of how we're going to think about this, and then drive the legislature through various means, drive the legislature toward that goal. We don't have a governor who's setting those bounds anymore. Right. And so the legislature doesn't have the leadership that's driving it toward that goal. And so they've just fallen into give us all the wealth and we'll dole out the 21, 11, and 1. We'll decide who gets the wealth that we get from the commonly owned resources. They've just sort of fallen back into that. If Jay was still around, if Jay was still the governor, if Jay was still, Jay, even after he was governor, had a huge influence on things. If he was still around to, I think, provide that guidance, and had a governor who was following that guidance or following that approach, I think we'd be in a much different place. And as I think about it, that's why I can't get behind any of these gubernatorial candidates. They don't start with the individual. They start with the state. We're either going to make the state bigger, we're going to make the state smaller, but they start with the state.
Is there any of them out there that even have an inkling of this, or is there anybody who could change their platform slightly to match what you're talking about here? 1 minute.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. None of them. I mean, I could go through all the candidates and why they're all failing in this, and I don't know if any of them have the ability to turn it around and to rethink what they're doing. But I can't support any of them. I don't know what I'm going to do. I can't support any of them because they're all just focused on how they manipulate the state in how the state controls Alaskans. They're not talking about empowering individual Alaskans in the first place.
I don't know, Brad. I mean, I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying there with the, with the kind of this Hammond thing where we've just lost it. And again, it's a politician thing. I mean, we got politicians who have been in the legislature for 2 decades, and they're antithetical to Hammond's whole vision of the individual Alaskan. They've looked to it, as you said, as either how do we make the government bigger, badder, stronger? How do we get more revenue for the government so that we can nanny state people it's like the individual Alaskan. It doesn't even matter anymore.
Yeah, and we don't have anybody who's even aspired. Dunleavy, when he ran in 2018, said he was the Hammond candidate in various ways. He said he was the Hammond candidate, and he was going to, protect the PFD, put Alaskans first, and then deal with the consequences what that did with government. After 2019, he just sort of let that go off the board and really hasn't tried, hasn't been vocal in articulating a vision since. And as I say, none of the candidates have picked it up. If you were around then, I've done it through reading and through listening and talking to people who were there and all that sort of stuff. There was a big divide between Hammond and Hickel in the old days, right? Hammond was the individualist. Hammond was, we're going to empower individual Alaskans to make their lives better. Hickel was, the state's going to control everything. We're going to build big things. We're going to do big things. The state is the owner state. We're going to control all this stuff, and we're going to use the revenue from the state. Hickel wasn't a big fan of the PFD at the beginning. We're going to use the revenue from this stuff to build a big state. That's what we've really got now, is just all Hickel candidates. Hickel, interestingly enough, Hickel in his later life became a PFD advocate. There's an op-ed he wrote before he passed away, extolling the PFD and talking about the good the PFD did and why we should preserve the PFD and protect the PFD. But in his heyday, he was a big state guy. And so, we got people who are running to be another Hickel. We got Walker, even Bernadette, who are talking about the Hickel legacy and the things they can do with the state, or how they can limit the state. We don't have anybody who, like Jay, started the starting point of which was the individual, how we're going to benefit the individual Alaskan, and then go from there in how we're going to deal with the state.
Well, I can see how this puts you in a conundrum with none of the candidates really matching up for your vision of what governor is. But who do you think is the best candidate? Sybil's asking who is the best candidate. So who do you think out of all those, even though they don't match your vision, is there any of them in there that's worth a damn? I mean, is there any candidate in there that you think is, that you're going to hold your nose for and pull the lever? I mean, where are you at?
No, I mean, that's what I'm trying to say. There isn't any one of them that motivates me. I mean, there are a couple, as I said on the show previously, there were a couple that I held out some hope for, that were members of the Legislative Fiscal Policy Working Group. 2021, is that how far back that was? Anyway, who were members of the Legislative Fiscal Policy Working Group. JKT was a co-chair of that, and Shelley Hughes was on that. And I held out hope for them that they would take the work of the Fiscal Policy Working Group, which was really good, comprehensive fiscal plan, take the work of the Fiscal Policy Working Group and make it the centerpiece of their campaign. And part of that is to restore the PFD. Part of that is to protect the PFD. But both of them have run away from it. I mean, Shelley talks about the PFD, but then she also talks about not taxing the oil companies and not taxing individual Alaskans. Well, you can't do that. You can't make the economics, you can't make the fiscals of the state work doing that. You're not going to get a 25% spending cut, which is what that would take. So Shelley's run away from it. AKT never even ran close to it from the time he started running. I mean, JKT has talked about more things that the state can do, which is going to take more revenue, which makes the problem worse. And he really hasn't talked about how he's going to develop the revenue to pay for all that. So the two I had hope for at the beginning have run away from the very thing that gave me hope about them, and none of the rest of them, I think, get it. I mean, Bernadette talks about we're going to restore Bernadette's like Dunleavy 2018. We're going to restore the PFD. How the hell are you going to do that?
Yeah, how do you pay for it? Frank makes a good point. What happened to the last person from the fiscal planning group that wanted to fix the revenue? That would have been Ben Carpenter. I mean, what happened? Alaskans, you can't handle the truth is what I'm hearing. You can't handle the truth in that the fact is we can't keep doing what we're doing. And it's very frustrating to watch these candidates. I'm with you. I mean, I'm at this point where I like some for certain things. I like others for other things, but nobody in there is inspiring me to go out there and campaign for them or do anything else. There's nobody out there that has all the answers that that we're looking for, or even as close at this point to that.
Yeah, I think that's it. Nobody even has a core, a starting point where they're max or where they're focusing on the individual. I think it's just everybody starts at the state. Maybe that's a reflection of where we've come to as a state. Maybe that's a reflection of where voters are. But everybody starts with the state. I'm going to make it bigger. I'm going to make it smaller. But it's all focused on the state. It's not focused with, as Hammond did, starting with the individual. I'm going to make your life better. Then I'm going to deal with how the hell I pay for that. But I'm going to make your life better.
Yeah. Well, and I could see Miguel says at the end of the day, we all have to make a decision, correct? Well, yeah, we do. But it's a question of, do we do it grudgingly, or do we just not vote? I mean, I don't know. It's a challenge. Final thoughts, let you go here.
Final thoughts is $1.9 billion. I mean that we are in a fiscal crisis in the state, and we need to recognize that and deal with it.
Right, Keith Lee, Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Enjoy your time, my friend, in your paradise. I appreciate you.
Michael, as always, thanks for having me. Well, that's a wrap for another week's edition of the weekly top 3 from Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. Thank you again for joining us. Remember that you can find past episodes on our YouTube, SoundCloud, Spotify, and Substack pages, and keep track of us during the week on Facebook and Twitter. This has been Brad Keithley, Managing Director of Alaskans for Sustainable Budgets. We look forward to you joining us again next week for the next edition of the weekly top 3.